You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks and Zach Bechtold. We hope you enjoy this week's show, and you can find out more about us by going online at beardedtheologians.com, where you can pick up a few t-shirts, listen to a few old episodes, and find ways that you can connect with us. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week we have a really fun topic, I think, picked out for you all today. Zach, what do you think about boredom?
What do I think about boredom?
And how, like, let me.
Okay. All right.
Two parts.
Uh,
what do you think about boredom, and how does boredom connect with faith?
What do I think about boredom, and how does boredom connect to faith? Boredom is an interesting thing for somebody who, for everybody, but especially those of us who have ADHD. Boredom is a fun little brain exercise. No, I struggle with allowing myself to be bored, and I think we live in a culture that leans into that also. Flying back from Denver this week, I found it very fascinating. It's not the first time I've noticed it, but it struck me in a different way last night. I think because it was dark as we flew back into Bozeman, so I could see the glow of screens throughout the plane, and it wasn't just a handful of screens. Uh, everyone, everyone had their phone or their iPad, myself included. Uh, and I did the really nosy thing, and I looked around in the seats that I could see as to what people were doing on their phones. I personally was watching a comedy special and giggling next to the people beside me who didn't have headphones on, so I'm sure they were super annoyed. But the lady beside me was playing solitaire on her phone. The other lady was watching the news. The people in front of me were doing some of them were reading, some of them were watching shows. Many people were just playing solitaire, mahjong, or Farmville, or just doing something kind of mindlessly on their phone, which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not certainly not here to lean into any kind of judgment, but I found it fascinating, and found myself thinking back to when I started flying regularly on airplanes, well before everybody had a screen. Um, and I remember newspapers and books and people having conversations and things like that. And it struck me last night that, again, that we are a people who can't be bored. We occupy our time and energy and eyeballs and brain space uh, to sometimes productive things, reading, working, doing the things like that in those situations, but also mindlessly scrolling or playing solitaire or Candy Crush, um, things that are slightly less productive, all because we're bored. And I find myself, I've taken all the games off my phone in the last 3 years because I don't want to just sit and play games. I would, I don't do it very often, but when I find myself wanting that, I try to pick up a book and read. Uh, and not do it on my phone. Pick up a physical book, or maybe even listen to an audiobook, but not look at the little shiny thing in my hand. And encounter boredom in a different way. So that's boredom just in general. What boredom looks like in our faith, I don't think much different. I think we don't lean into boredom enough in the ways of listening and grounding ourselves in our spiritual practices to hear those moments where before where we could hear God speak, where we could hear and feel the leanings of the Spirit. Rather, I pot calling the kettle black. I and the worst, will distract myself so I don't have to lean into that. Um, Running's a great example. I had somebody a few years ago ask me, "Man, you must really love running, because you know, time to talk to God." I was like, "Oh, no thanks." I put headphones in my ears and I try to distract myself from that. I don't want to be in my head in those moments. And some of it's because I don't want to be bored. Some of it's because I don't want to deal with things. But there is opportunity in our boredom to lean deeper or pay deeper attention to the ways in which uh, we hear, see, experience God in a way that we don't notice when we're distracting ourselves because we're bored. That was a lot of me talking. What do you think, man?
I find it interesting that we brought this up during Lent,
Yeah.
but I also think it's healthy
Hmm.
because we do a good job of talking about the lows and the
Hmm.
highs. But what about the plains?
Yeah. What about the in between?
We have times of plains in our life, and that's okay, where we just do the things like, or things just seem repetitive, or there is that space. And I think there's healthiness in that space. There is being on a plane is a good place because it allows us to create rhythms. It allows us to recognize maybe we're not on a plane, maybe we're in a valley, or maybe we're on a
Hmm.
mountaintop and we didn't really realize it. But yet, after having driven Western Kansas last week,
What's
I
boring about Western Kansas?
there is a time um, where you can really discern the path forward, or prepare yourself for what is to come. Like I know last week as I was driving to Derby, Kansas, and hitting, from Lineman to Salina. It's literally the boringest drive that I make ever in my life. Um, but it allowed me to be ready to be in a space of grieving for my family. It
Mhm.
allowed me to prepare myself to be the officiant of the funeral service. It allowed me to take a deep breath and let go of the things that were holding me, kind of giving me FOMO,
Hmm.
and all that stuff. Like it gave me that space of boredom sometimes can give us a space of clarity,
Hmm.
and that it's okay to be in that space of plain, like
Hmm.
that's fine. And I
Hmm.
think even in that space, there are things we can do to take care of ourselves, read,
Yeah.
scripture and all those spiritual disciplines that we may have. I don't think we emphasize that enough. I
Hmm.
think we spend too much time in uh, the peaks and valleys, and because those are good stories. Like I'm not gonna lie, nobody
Yeah.
wants to hear, Zach read his Bible today. He he found Jesus in his Bible. Like, like that stuff. Like, you
Sure.
know, but I think there's some healthiness in being in that board space. It allows us to clear our heads. And I always think of it, there's some spiritual practices that are called clearing, where you just
Hmm.
clear your mind of everything and you let go of anything that may try to cause you to not be so focused.
Hmm.
And I really do believe that that's where the having that space of clarity or a space of boredom is actually can be really, 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 really healthy.
Hmm. Well, and that's you talk about the in between. That's our whole sermon, Lenten sermon series here, and really remembering or leaning into our faith in life doesn't happen in the extremes of the mountaintops and the valleys, right? They happen in those in between moments, and that's where God meets us right where we are, and when we least expect it, and that kind of stuff. And um, I boredom's a funny word because it carries a lot of baggage or just a lot of meaning or not a lot of meaning for different people, right? Like it's a personality driven thing. Like what bores me may not bore you. Sitting in the silence, doing clearing meditations or just being present and, listening to the birds may not be boring for one person. and maybe excruciating for the next, right? So
As I
it's
say, that sounds like you're testifying. You're like kind of self-reflecting here. How much silence kind of.
I hate silence. Yeah, I will name that. But I know for some people, like doing the monastic practices of going on silent retreats and being in that space is so life-giving. I wish it was for me. Uh, and it's not a matter of embracing it and wanting to practice it. It would hurt, and I know that about myself. Uh, and so I think that's what's fun about thinking about what does boredom look like in our spirituality. Uh, is it that intentional, deeper invitation to intentionality, right? Like that inviting ourselves into not into uncomfortable spaces so that we can hear. Knowing that we don't have to stay there forever, right? Like it can be just a minute. Like you don't have to go 0 to 90 if you're like me and quiet is painful. You don't have to just say, okay, well, I'm gonna go to do a silent retreat for 3 weeks. You don't have to do that. What does 30 seconds during your lunch break look like? Just take a deep breath and to hear what's going on around you, um, and build upon that rather than say, well, today's the day. I'm gonna sit outside and I'm gonna listen to the birds for an hour, and 30 seconds goes by and you're like, oh, it's been 30 seconds. Right. And so what does it look like? What is it if we frame it less in boredom and frame it more in the intentionality of, here's where I am today. Nothing exciting is happening, and that's okay. Who It's the question we ask at the end of the day, or at the end of the podcast of where do we see God at work? Sometimes they're in those big moments or the low moments, but often you and I find ourselves in that in-between space of like, you know, it was the little things. It was here or there, or I just don't know today. And that's okay. And so I don't know. I like this idea of, we talk about it sometimes in the summer of the dog days of ordinary time and things like that. But I think framing it in the idea of boredom and kind of reclaiming that a little bit as a spiritual practice of it maybe not boredom, but the intentionality to be be in a different place than we normally are and just allow uh, what happens to happen.
Yeah, and like I said, I think there's not enough conversation about um being in the plane.
Hmm.
I know there's a sermon on the plane. I know there's some of that stuff, but I think that when we can give permission and space for the plane, then people won't feel so um oh consumeristic bored.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that that's an issue. Like
Yeah.
we expect, you know, one of the things that I know you've heard this just as well as I have, in a sense of our worship can be boring sometimes, but we need that boring space,
Hmm.
like that silence. Like I don't know if you do or not, but I
Hmm.
know when we take moments of silence, like people like flip out. But like there is like we almost have every week we have some time of silence, and that's I think that's necessary. I think it
Hmm.
allows us to center. Like I appreciate that time of silence when we have it because it
Hmm.
allows me to be in a space of um just being in the presence and not just being stuck
Hmm.
of going from the next thing to the next thing because we live in a world of busyness.
Yeah.
But if we can slow down and literally just be open with our thoughts and and be open to where God may be speaking to us, we can um, slowly begin to see where God is at work in our
Hmm.
lives, but not be stuck in having to do the next thing. And I
Hmm.
really do think that we get so caught up
Hmm.
in the busyness of life that when something slows down and something opens itself up,
Hmm.
uh, we enter into that commercial, consumeristic boredom that is unhealthy.
Yeah.
because then
Yeah.
we fill our lives with other things that are not what we need. And
Right.
sometimes that stillness, and one of my favorite verses is Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Like we
Yeah.
need that stillness.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. And no, you're right in all of that, and the allowing ourselves that space to be still. And it's funny that our maybe it's not funny, I don't know. Our two high holy seasons, Advent and Lent, that we really lean into these practices, both call us to slow down, call us to wait, call us to anticipate, call us to let something go so that we can let something else in. And I think a lot of I think a lot about when people tell me, or even when I feel it myself, of the, I just don't hear God talking to me right now. Or something like, oh God, anytime we make the argument to do communion every week, I just won't have the same meaning. Will it? Will the meaning behind celebrating communion every time we gather dry up? Or is it going to call us into something different? Is reciting the Lord's Prayer going to call us into a repetitive nature, or an intentional moment to hear what sticks out this week? That our spiritual life can be repetitive and have these moments that we draw back into, but not to create boredom, but to create intentionality, to lean in something familiar, into something that may bring out, oh, here's where I hear God this week. Here's how God's talking to me, and it may not be the same next week. Um, but I think you're right. We live in a society that says boredom is bad. We can't be bored. We have to be occupied, mind, body, and soul all the time. Uh, and how does our faith reflect that? And how can we maybe lean into the boredom a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good place for us to land
Yeah.
today. So Zach, since the last time we had the podcast, where have you seen God at work in your life?
It's been a couple weeks. Kind of all over the place. I've was in Denver this week, and got to spend some very good and sacred time with folks working through our process and of ordination, and folks that are help leading that. Uh, and uh, Maybe obviously the Holy Spirit's all over that. Um, but a couple of weeks ago, I got to sit with a family from our community that was grieving the sudden loss of a loved one, and truly just take up some space in their life and answer questions about about God, about spirituality, about process, about grief, just all of the things that we go through in those moments. A family I never met before. Funeral home called me up and said, "Hey, there's a family that might need you," and the their willingness to trust me in that space is never something that's lost on me when I gather with a family, whether I know them or not. And yeah, just getting to walk in those sacred spaces for me is always a place where I see the Holy Spirit show up and find God in the unexpected ways. And I'm always grateful for that reminder and the privilege to be in that space with folks. So, yeah, one of the many over the last few weeks. What about you?
Um, one of the reasons why we couldn't record last week is because I had to go
Mhm.
unexpectedly to Kansas and preside over my great uncle's um uh funeral services. And I have to admit this one hit harder than I expected,
Mhm.
for a lot of reasons. Still fresh off my dad, coming up on mom's anniversary date. Like there's just a lot there. Um, and so I found myself in that space of grieving in a way that it just was heavy.
Mm.
And so I didn't know if I was going to be able to, like, I really wrestled with it. How was I going to make this? Like, this, I'm going to need some help. And I, just um, definitely said a little prayer, that kind of thing. And I found myself, there was an opportunity, and I'm not one for these opportunities in the space because they can be sometimes they can be a little bit hard.
Mhm.
And so
Playing
um
from Zach's Mac Mini.
it was interesting to hear his grandchildren stand up and speak in a way that was powerful. And that
Mhm.
doesn't happen all that often when we enter into those spaces,
Mhm.
as you know just as well as I do. And so that was just such a great God moment, and it was just so powerful. I was so grateful for them, their willingness to do that, because it's a vulnerable space to be in. I understand that. And so it just was a very deeply spiritual moment. And I know even for my, like, even in my space of driving, even driving home, even in that
Mhm.
plane of driving home, I found myself like taking a deep breath, being able to recharge for the week ahead, knowing that, you know, Saturday was jam packed full of things, and it's a weekend, and like there's just so much going on, uh, that it was just such a great, like, I don't know, that there was power in the plane. So yeah, um listeners, we definitely want to thank you for listening. We are grateful for you, and um definitely hope that you listen to some of our past shows. We're definitely in year number 10. And so we're grateful for you, and just keep listening, pick up a few items. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
And like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.